Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today we're going to tackle something that's super important in healthcare, but can sometimes feel a little dry. We're talking about procedures.
Yeah,
Specifically, how to implement them effectively.
right.
I know the word procedures doesn't exactly scream excitement, but trust me, this stuff is crucial.
Oh, absolutely.
We're not just talking about ticking boxes here. This is
Yes.
about like ensuring patient safety,
Yeah.
keeping treatments consistent across the board, and even, protecting hospitals from legal issues. We're going to be using this awesome guide, Implementing Effective Healthcare Procedures, a comprehensive checklist to break it all down.
Yeah, and one of the coolest things this guide really stresses is the importance of starting with a thorough needs assessment
Oh, okay.
before even thinking about writing a single procedure.
That makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like if you're remodeling your kitchen, you don't just start like ripping out cabinets. You got to figure out what's working, what's not, and what your actual needs are before you go crazy with a sledgehammer.
Exactly. So in this assessment, you're really taking stock. You're asking yourself, what's already working well?
Okay.
Where are those gaps in our processes?
Right.
Are there any regulations we need to address? And maybe even more importantly, who do we need to talk to get a complete picture of the situation?
That's a really great point. It's not just like one person in charge making all the decisions. This guide's all about collaboration, getting input from everyone involved, staff, patients, even, the folks from regulatory bodies.
Absolutely. You got to make sure these procedures actually meet the needs of the people who are going to be using them day in and day out?
Exactly. Make them practical, not just some like theoretical thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say you've done your needs assessment, you've chatted with everyone. Now what?
Well, now it's all about clarity.
Okay, so how do we do that?
The guide is big on using simple language, clear, specific instructions, and even stuff like flowcharts to make these procedures super easy to follow.
Right, because you don't want people scratching their heads trying to decipher some super complex jargon.
Exactly. We want everyone, regardless of their experience level, to understand these procedures no matter what.
Okay. This reminds me of those like IKEA assembly instructions. Have you ever put together IKEA furniture?
Oh, tons of times.
They do a pretty good job of communicating like these crazy complicated steps with just pictures.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Right. It's like universal.
It's like a universal language.
Exactly. And just like those instructions, healthcare procedures need to be that crystal clear.
They really do.
Speaking of clarity, this guide is all about checklists.
Oh, yeah.
It really emphasizes how crucial they are as safety nets, especially in those like high pressure situations where even the most experienced folks can make mistakes.
Absolutely. And, it's been proven. Like, think about the WHO surgical safety checklist. That thing has drastically reduced surgical complications all around the world just by having a well-designed checklist.
That's amazing. It's funny you mentioned checklists because I actually have a confession to make. Just the other day, I was putting together this new bookshelf, totally convinced I didn't need the checklist.
Oh.
And let's just say it did not end well. A lot of extra screws, a very wonky bookshelf. And it just made me realize these checklists, they're not just for like life or death situations. They're for anything with multiple steps.
They really are. I mean, a misstep in assembling a bookshelf might be funny, but in a healthcare setting, not so much.
Exactly.
No.
All right, now let's get down to the foundation. What are these procedures actually based on? What are they built on?
Well, they need to be grounded in the latest and greatest research and evidence. We don't want them based on tradition or assumptions. Healthcare is always evolving, right?
Always changing.
And our procedures have got to keep pace.
So we need to be constantly reviewing and updating them.
Absolutely. You can't just set it and forget it. We got to stay on top of new research, emerging best practices, and, any evolving guidelines. Got to make sure our procedures are current, reliable.
All the good stuff.
Yeah.
All right. So we've got these like fantastic procedures, well-researched, clear, with those handy checklists built in, but they're useless if our staff doesn't understand them. That brings us to training, and this guide dives deep.
Oh, yeah. Training is everything. And it's not just about memorizing a bunch of steps. It's about making sure everyone understands the why behind the what.
Your reasoning.
Yeah, exactly. The rationale.
I love how the guide is all about catering to different learning styles.
Yeah.
It suggests using a mix of methods, classroom sessions, hands-on practice, even e-learning modules.
Right, because we all learn in different ways. Some people learn best by doing, others by seeing, some through interactive stuff. You gotta mix it up and keep everyone engaged.
Absolutely. And it's not a one-and-done thing, right? Can't just train people once and expect them to remember it forever.
Nope. We need ongoing training. Refreshers, competency assessments, feedback. All of that helps keep everyone's skills sharp and their knowledge up to date.
Perfect. So we've covered creating these rock-solid procedures. But how do we know if they're actually working in the real world? This is where we move from theory to practice with monitoring and evaluation.
Yeah. So first things first, we got to define what success looks like. What are we actually trying to achieve with these procedures? We need to establish clear goals, those key performance indicators or KPIs.
Got it. Those KPIs are going to tell us if we're on the right track.
Exactly. And to track those KPIs, the guide recommends regular audits to see how those procedures are playing out in practice. And of course, we need feedback from the folks who are actually using these procedures day to day, the people on the front lines,
The ones in the trenches.
Yes, that feedback loop is gold. It lets us adapt, refine procedures based on real-world experience, and make sure they're truly effective.
Makes sense. Now, let's talk documentation. Meticulous record-keeping is non-negotiable in healthcare, right? It's way more than just, like, bureaucracy.
Oh, absolutely. Documentation is everything. It's a record of care provided, it's legal protection, it's future reference, it's essential for quality improvement. This guide nails that point home.
So we're talking detailed records of every single step in the procedure, including any, like, deviations from the standard protocol. We want a clear, accurate trail of what went down.
Yes, absolutely. But here's the thing. While thorough documentation is crucial, we can't forget about patient confidentiality. We got to follow those IPOC guidelines to protect sensitive information. It's all about balance. We need those detailed records, but we also need to make sure we're protecting patient privacy.
Okay, so finding that sweet spot. Now, this guide isn't just about the nuts and bolts of the procedures themselves, right? It also talks about fostering this culture of continuous improvement.
Yeah.
What exactly does that mean?
Well, it means creating an environment where everyone feels comfortable contributing to making things better. It's about encouraging innovation, welcoming feedback, and constantly looking for ways to refine and improve our procedures.
I love that.
We should see mistakes as learning opportunities, not something to be afraid of.
Absolutely. It's moving away from that, like, blame game and embracing more of a collaborative, learning-oriented approach.
Exactly. And this ties back to what we were talking about earlier about involving everyone. It's not a one-time thing, it's an ongoing process. Everyone from the staff on the front lines to the patients themselves should feel like they have a voice in shaping these procedures.
I love that. Now, we can't talk about modern healthcare without addressing the elephant in the room technology. It's transforming everything.
It really is.
The guide acknowledges how crucial technology is in this whole process.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got electronic health records, streamlining documentation, decision support systems providing guidance in real time, and telemedicine, which is, like, changing the game in terms of access to care.
It can even revolutionize how we train staff on these procedures.
Oh, absolutely. And don't forget about tools like DocRaid, seamlessly integrating with SharePoint to help manage, distribute procedures, track compliance, generate reports. It can be a game changer.
It sounds like it. So technology is amazing. It can make things so much more efficient and make sure everyone has access to the latest information.
Right.
But at the end of the day, we can't forget the heart of it all. The patient.
Right. They're the reason we're doing all of this.
Exactly. The guide really emphasizes patient involvement. It's all about educating patients about the procedures, getting their feedback, and even trying to work in their preferences whenever possible.
Yeah. We want patients to feel like they're active participants in their care, not just like passive recipients.
It's about building trust and making sure their voices are heard.
It's not just about ticking boxes and following rules.
It's about respecting patients' autonomy and acknowledging that they have individual needs and concerns.
Beautifully put. This has been such an incredible deep dive so far. It feels like we've barely scratched the surface of this checklist for implementing effective healthcare procedures.
We've covered a lot, but there's always more to unpack, right?
Always. So we'll be right back to explore some of the more, shall we say, overlooked parts of this process. Stay tuned.
Can't wait.
Okay, so we're back and ready to keep digging into this checklist for making healthcare procedures truly top-notch.
Let's do it.
Before the break, we were talking about, everything from figuring out what you need to begin with to the amazing tech out there and how important it is to include patients. But there's another piece of the puzzle we haven't really touched on yet.
Oh, yeah, and it's a big one. Regulatory compliance.
Right. It can sometimes feel like you're navigating this, like, maze of rules and regulations.
It definitely can. Healthcare is super regulated, for good reason, of course, and all our procedures need to be aligned with those rules. Think IPRA, state-specific requirements, the whole shebang.
It can feel pretty overwhelming. So how does this guide recommend we handle that?
Yeah.
Staying compliant while also making sure these procedures are, actually usable in the real world.
It all starts with really understanding all the laws and regulations that apply to your specific area of healthcare. What applies to a massive hospital might be totally different for a small private practice, right?
Okay, so it's not just about knowing there are rules out there. It's about getting into the nitty-gritty details.
Exactly. And it's not a learn it once and you're good kind of thing. Healthcare regulations are always changing, evolving.
Well, for sure.
So we've got to be on top of that, staying informed about any updates and making sure our procedures reflect those changes.
So it's more like a living document,
Right.
not something you just create and then file away forever.
Exactly. That's why the guide recommends doing regular compliance audits. Check those procedures against the latest standards and make updates as needed. Got to stay within those legal and ethical boundaries.
So it sounds like that culture of continuous improvement we were talking about earlier applies just as much to compliance as it does to any other part of developing these procedures.
100%. It's a journey, not a destination.
Love that.
Okay.
So we've talked a ton about staff training, staying on top of those regulations, and the ins and outs of actually making these procedures. But of course, at the center of it all is the patient.
Always, always, always.
It's easy to get lost in the weeds sometimes, But everything we do is about taking care of people. So how does this guide address making things patient-centered?
It lays out a bunch of ways to make sure patients feel like active participants in their own care, not just, passive recipients. And it starts with education. We need to make sure patients get clear, easy to understand info about the procedures and what they can expect.
It seems so basic, but I bet that makes a world of difference.
Oh, it does. When patients understand what's going on, they're less anxious, more likely to follow instructions, and they just feel more in control.
It just makes sense. And it goes beyond just giving them a pamphlet or something. Right.
Totally. The guide is all about actively seeking patient feedback. Ask them, what did you think? Did anything feel confusing? Any suggestions? That kind of feedback is like gold for making these procedures more patient-friendly.
Showing respect, making them feel heard.
Exactly. And whenever we can, we should try to work their preferences into the procedures. Obviously, there are limits, but even small changes can make a big difference in their overall experience.
It's a balancing act, right? Following the protocol, but also being flexible enough to meet people's individual needs. How do we navigate that?
It's all about open communication and shared decision-making. Doctors, nurses, the whole team, talking with the patient, explaining the reasoning behind things, working together to find the best approach for each person.
Okay, so it's not just about blindly following a checklist. It's about using it as a tool to deliver truly compassionate, patient-centered care. That's what makes this guide so valuable.
100%. It's about seeing the person, not just the procedure.
Beautifully said. We've covered so much ground today. Needs assessments, clear language, making sure things are based on evidence, training, checking if it's working, documentation, tech, patients, regulations. It's a lot.
It is a lot. But you know what ties all these things together?
Let me guess, communication.
Bingo! You can have the most amazing procedures in the world, but if communication breaks down, the whole system can fall apart.
Okay, so let's break that down. Why is communication so crucial when it comes to these procedures?
The guide really stresses the need for standardized communication protocols. Everyone involved, doctors, nurses, techs, admin staff, needs to be on the same page about how to communicate clearly and consistently.
So it's like having a common language, right? Less risk of mix-ups, errors, delays, all that.
Exactly. And it's not just about what we're saying, but how we're saying it. Using different channels like verbal for urgent stuff, written documentation for the records, and electronic systems to keep everything organized.
So we're building in redundancy to make sure nothing falls through the cracks, especially important in healthcare where things can change so fast.
Yep. And it's not just top-down communication either. We need to encourage that flow of information in both directions. Staff should feel comfortable asking questions, raising concerns, giving feedback.
There's that culture of continuous improvement again.
It's all connected. Open communication builds trust, collaboration, and everyone feels responsible for keeping patients safe and well cared for.
It's amazing how something as simple as communication can have such a huge impact on whether these procedures actually work or not.
It really is the glue that holds everything together. And remember, communication isn't a one-time thing. It needs to be happening throughout the entire process, from the very beginning when you're figuring out what you need to do, to checking in on how things are going down the line.
Right. Keep everyone in the loop. If things change, make sure people know about it. Explain why. That helps prevent confusion and keeps everyone on the same page.
Absolutely. And all this talk about communication leads us to another crucial element of making these procedures work: the human element.
Oh, right. It's easy to get caught up in all the checklists and rules and regulations, but at the end of the day, this is about people taking care of people.
Couldn't have said it better myself. The guide really stresses how important it is to foster a positive and supportive work environment, one where everyone feels valued, respected, and like they can actually do their best work.
That sounds amazing. But how do we actually do that, especially in a healthcare setting where things can be super busy and stressful?
It starts with leadership, setting the tone, promoting that open communication, celebrating people's contributions, and making sure everyone has the support and resources they need to thrive.
So creating a space where people feel safe to speak up, ask for help when they need it, and admit mistakes without feeling like they're going to get in trouble.
You got it. When people feel safe and supported, they're more likely to be engaged, motivated, and dedicated to providing great care. And that means better outcomes for patients.
It all comes full circle. This has been such a rich discussion. We've looked at this checklist from every angle: needs assessments, clear language, evidence-based practices, training, checking in on things, documentation, technology, patient involvement, regulatory stuff, and of course, communication.
It's a lot, but it's all connected. And throughout it all, we've emphasized that human element of healthcare, creating a space where everyone feels like they can contribute to making things better.
I'm really glad we dove into this. Thanks for sharing your expertise and breaking this all down for us.
My pleasure. Hopefully our listeners got some good takeaways they can use in their own work.
Now, this deep dive has been packed with insights, but before we wrap things up, is there anything else from this checklist that you think deserves a little extra spotlight?
As we've been going through this whole checklist, one thing that really sticks out to me is how interconnected all these different pieces are.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just nail one or two things.
Right.
You really need that big picture approach. You got to address all the aspects of implementing these procedures.
Yeah, it's not just a checklist of things to check off. It's a framework for building a system.
Exactly.
Where all those pieces work together.
Right. It's like a well-oiled machine. Right?
Exactly.
If one gear is messed up, the whole thing can fall apart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to not just implement these procedures, but to actually keep an eye on them, see how they're working.
Right.
We should constantly be asking ourselves, are we getting the results we want? Are people actually following them? Are there any unintended consequences popping up?
Right. It's all about that feedback loop we talked about earlier.
Got to be willing to tweak things, make adjustments as you go. It's not about being perfect from day one.
Nope.
It's about having a system in place that can adapt and change over time.
It's a journey, not a destination.
And that brings us back to the people involved.
Exactly.
The folks who are actually making these procedures work, they need to feel empowered, like they're part of the process, not just following orders.
100%.
So how do we do that? How do we create that kind of environment? One where people feel like they can speak their mind, share ideas, raise concerns.
You got to build a culture where people feel safe to do that.
Okay.
It's about encouraging collaboration, innovation, not just, blind compliance.
Right, because sometimes the best ideas come from the people who are actually doing the work.
Absolutely. They're the ones on the ground seeing how things play out in real life.
So this checklist isn't just a set of rules. It's bigger than that. Yeah. It's about creating a healthcare system that's more patient-centered, efficient, and able to adapt to whatever comes its way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. If we follow these guidelines, we can go beyond just checking boxes and create procedures that really work for everyone involved, both patients and providers.
This has been amazing.
It really has.
I've learned so much from this deep dive. Thanks so much for breaking down this topic for us.
My pleasure. Glad we could dive in together.
And a huge thank you to Doc Reed for Office 365 for supporting this episode. Their document management system can be a real game changer for healthcare organizations that want to streamline this whole process.
For sure.
And to all our listeners out there, we'd love to hear from you. What are your biggest challenges when it comes to making sure these healthcare procedures are effective? What tips or strategies have you found that work well? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments.
Yeah, let's keep this conversation going.
Thanks for joining us for the deep dive. We'll be back soon with another exciting topic. Until then, stay curious.